Parshas Kedoshim has so many mitzvahs in it, and it's pointed out that in the very beginning, this is something which was said El Kol Yisrael. It was said to all of Am Yisrael. It was said, Bahakel is the Lashon Chazal use. Everyone's gathered together. The Sfas says that this is why we find that so many of the mitzvahs, so many of the mitzvahs are mitzvahs ben adam lachavera that we have here. The mitzvah of Kedoshim too, the Sfas says, can only be done when a person is mevatel himself to all of Am Yisrael. Right? In other words, Kedusha is a gift to Am Yisrael, but it's something which is given nationally, not individually. So he says, therefore, this is why there are so many mitzvahs ben adam lachavera in Kedoshim, because it's emphasizing different ways in which we can be together and certainly stop separation among us, whether between individuals or groups. Now, among the mitzvahs that we have is the mitzvah of Ahavas Hager. Okay, there's two mitzvahs. One in the positive sense, Ahavas Hager, right, to love the ger. The second is in the negative, right, it says, Chayoger itchager b'aretzachem lo tonu osa, o no'as hager, saying things which were hurtful to a ger, right, which the classic is, to remind him of what he did before he became a ger. That's the ono. And here we find the formulation. It says, Ge'ezrach mikem yelachem hager agoritchem, v'ahavta lo kamocha, you should love the ger, right, as you love yourself, ki gerim heyisem be'eretz Mitzrayim, because you were gerim in Eretz Mitzrayim, ani Hashem Elokechem. Okay, and there's a similar formulation in Sefer Dvarim, in Parshas Ekev, v'ahavtem es hager, ki gerim heyisem be'eretz Mitzrayim. Okay, now the question that comes up is, a ger becomes a Jew. That's the process of gerus. We have a mitzvah to love every Jew. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, also in the Parsha. So why does there have to be a special mitzvah to love the ger? He's a Jew, so you love him because of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. What is that doing? So Rav Hutner, in his Pachad Yitzchak on Pesach, brings the Rambam, and he really delves into the Rambam to understand how the Rambam understood the psukim and to build a case for it. Okay, again, there are different Mefarshim that understood these different ways. But listen to, first we'll just read the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Deos, the 6th parak says, Mitzvah al kol adam le'ehov kol echad ve'echad mi'Yisrael kegufo. It's a mitzvah on every person to love each and every Jew like himself. Shenemar v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. He says, Ahavas hager, now the love of a ger, shebo v'nichnas tachas kanfei hashchina, who came and entered under, so to speak, the wings of the Shechina. Shtei mitzvos aseh. There are two positive commandments that apply to him. Mipnei shehi bichlal re'im. Number one, you have the mitzvah to love him because he's a Jew, like any other Jew. But v'achas mipnei shehu ger. The second mitzvah of loving him is because he's a ger. V'atorah omer v'ahavta es hager. The Torah gave us a specific mitzvah to love the ger. And the Rambam goes on, Tziva al avas hager kamoshe tziva al avas atzmo. Hashem commanded us to love the ger in the same way that he commanded us to love him. Where do we see that? In Kriya Shema. V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu atzmo ohev gerim. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself loves the ger because it says in Devarim, V'ohev ger, Parshas Ekev, Osem mishpat yosem v'almona, V'ohev ger, lases lo lechem b'simla. Okay, so therefore Hashem says, I tell you to love me, and I love gerim, and I'm telling you to love the ger. So we still have the question, why two mitzvahs? So here, the way Rav Hutner explains the Rambam is the following. He says we have a few mitzvahs involving ahava, or in the negative sense, let's say, sina. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, to love your fellow Jew. Reacha. Lo sisna es ochicha bilvavecha. Don't hate your brother in your heart. So he says, let's imagine some scenarios. You have a neighbor who drives you crazy. He makes noise, he leaves garbage, and it doesn't take long for you to hate him, right? You wander around muttering, I hate him, I hate him. You've been hating him for 2 years. And then somebody happens to mention to you, says, you know your neighbor there, Joe? Yeah, he's Jewish. You're kidding. Oh no, I've been hating him for 2 years. That means I've been over on the Aver of Losisnos Achicha. Says Rav Hutner, no, you weren't. Because the Torah emphasizes that it's hating your fellow Jew. That hatred was not targeted toward your fellow Jew. It isn't even shogeg. He says the reasoning is part of the mitzvah. Let's look at it on the positive side. You have a neighbor that you love. He's great. He's always helping you out. He's keeping the street clean. He's offering to do you favors. You've been loving him for years. Then somebody comes to tell you the secret. You know what, John over there? His mother was Jewish. He's Jewish. You say, wow, for 5 years I've been doing the mitzvah of Ahavas Yisrael without knowing it. He said, no, you haven't. Because your love was not love based on Yisrael. It was loving a nice guy who was there. Okay? So he says, now, when we apply this to the idea of the Ahavas Hager, he says, the mitzvah of Ahavas Hager, the Rambam doesn't interpret like we see some of the others, that it comes almost to compensate. The Ramban writes that it's because Karav Hashem lenishberei lev. Hashem is close to those who are brokenhearted. And you see some of the Farshim, this is also the Ramban, that the Ger doesn't have somebody to stand up for him. So there's this special Ava which is there to protect and help and compensate for the Ger. The Rambam isn't saying that at all. The Rambam is saying you have to love him because of his Maila. Meaning, yes, you love him like every other Jew, but he's greater than every other Jew. And you have to love him because of that. That's the Lashon of the Rambam that he said, Avas Hager shebo v'nichnas tachas kanfei hashchina shtei mitzvos. 2 positive commandments. One, because he's bichlal rein, v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, v'achas mipnei shehu ger. And the other is because he's a ger, and the Torah says, v'ahavta sager. So he says here, in mitzvahs of ahava, the reason given for the ahava in the Torah is integral to it. If you didn't know the person was a ger, and you loved him, you knew he was Jewish, you loved him as v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, you fulfilled the mitzvah of v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, you did not fulfill the mitzvah of Ahavas Hager, because you didn't love him because of that amazing step that he took. Okay, so this is the way the Rambam explains it. Now, he says, the problem in the Pasuk is, how do we answer the finish? Meaning, it says in Ekev, V'ahavtem es hager, ki gerem me'yisem be'eretz Mitzrayim. In our Parsha, V'ahavta lo kamocha, ki gerem me'yisem be'eretz Mitzrayim. Because you too were gerim in Eretz Mitzrayim. Now, if, like according to the Ramban, there's the idea that he's a person who comes alone, he leaves his family, oftentimes he leaves his land, he has no connections, he's unknown. So the idea is, remember, you too were gerim in Eretz Mitzrayim, right? So therefore, you should certainly not hurt his feelings, lotono asager, and you should show him extra ava. But according to the Rambam, that it's a maila, that the ger, the reason for Ahavas Hager is because he left wherever he was and he came under Tachas Kanfei Hashchina. What does it have to do with Ki Gerim Me'isem Be'eretz Mitzrayim? Because you were Gerim in Eretz Mitzrayim. So he left that as an open question in the 8th Maimer in Pachad Yitzchak, and these went according to the years. And then in Maimer Kof Tes, he returns to this idea and to this question, and he says, now I can add on the understanding according to the Rambam of what it has to do with Ki Gerim Hayisem Be'eretz Mitzrayim. He says, the Rambam is explaining to us that the love for the ger is because of the maila that he left, not just that he was nichnas kanfei hashchina, but the way in which he did it. He entered the Jewish people with such drive that he separated and left everything that he had, oftentimes suffering from great opposition, from His family were members of another religion and part of another nation. And he's taking upon himself to live the rest of his life in a starting point and in a framework where he doesn't have what he used to have. He says, therefore, that's part of the milah of the ger that causes us to love him also. Not just what he came and joined, but how he came and everything that he left. He said that we're supposed to understand because kigerim ha'yisov eretz Mitzrayim. Meaning, Am Yisrael in Mitzrayim, even though they did reach the Memteh Sharei Tumah, we said in the Haggadah, Melamed shahayu mitzuyonim sham. They still retained a Jewish identity. They were still identified as Jews. They would say that they were Jews, right? The idea shaloshinu lashmam lashonim u'mabusham. They didn't change their names, their language, and their clothing, which according to my grandkids' coloring books means they wore streimlach and they spoke Yiddish and they had names like Shraga Feivel, right? But that's so they maintained that there. And they could have really tried to assimilate. In other words, by accepting that identity, they were always in the status of a ger instead of a toshov. A Jew who really totally abandons his identity can now really join in. You can marry an Egyptian girl. You can take on the Egyptian religion. You can become a toshov of a country that you move into, as long as you go all in. But kigerim ha'yisem beretz Mitzrayim, you didn't do that. For centuries, you accepted upon yourselves to be outsiders, to be those who would be different. So therefore, he says that does fit with the Rambam's picture of loving the ger because of his milah. That the milah of the ger is not just that he came to join Am Yisrael, which is a tremendous milah which is there, but in the way in which he did it, that it's in a way of gerus, of leaving comfort, the ability to be a toshov, roots. Right? I've known people who are Gerei Tzedek where they said, yeah, our family came over from the Mayflower, which again in England doesn't mean much, a couple hundred years, but in America that's the oldest of the aristocracy that came over in these kind of things, and that was it. They came to Virginia whenever it was in the 1700s, and he has all of his cousins, but he leaves it all, right? And they're good Protestants, all of them, and he leaves it. And he comes and he joins the Jewish people, where he's starting somewhat from ground zero in terms of his connections, in terms even of his knowledge. That idea of that gerus is something which is so key and part of what has to be admired. So let's take a look for a second. We'll zoom the lens out and we'll zoom it in a second. Going back to Ahavas Yisrael, the general love for Am Yisrael, we have to realize that really has to be because the person is Jewish. Meaning, a lot of people, you say, do you have Ahavas Yisrael? Yeah, I'm a friendly guy. I love everybody in my shul. I love everybody in my neighborhood. I love my relatives. I'm a loving guy. Why do you love them? I love them. They're lovable people. That's not Ahavas Yisrael. Ahavas Yisrael means that I love this person because he's a Jew. It may be he's annoying to you. It may be something else. It's there. But that's the Ahavas Yisrael we're trying to develop, right, which is there. Cliquishness, in which people form a social group in which they all love each other, is not necessarily Ahavas Yisrael. The Maharal asks, when it's speaking about the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa in Maseches Gittin, the story leading up to the destruction that everybody learns on Tisha B'Av. And it starts off by saying, Kamsa Bar Kamsa Chavu Yerushalayim. Because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, Yerushalayim was destroyed. And it lays out the story for us. There was a man who had a friend named Kamsa, and he had an enemy named Bar Kamsa. And he made a whole party, and he sent his servant to invite his friend Kamsa, and the Shlemazel got mixed up, and he invited his enemy Bar Kamsa. And Bar Kamsa came, and the man eventually threw him out, embarrassed him. Bar Kamsa took revenge. The story goes on. So the Maharal asks, why is it to this day Kamsa is blamed for the destruction of Yerushalayim? Every kid in school learns because of Kamsa and Bar. Kamsa didn't do anything. He was sitting at home. He didn't get the invitation. Why should his name even be mentioned in connection to the Churban? So one cute answer I heard is just, don't stand on ceremony. I mean, if a good friend of yours is making a wedding and for some reason you didn't get an invitation, so go, say Mazel Tov anyway. It might have been a mistake. It might have been mixed up. Don't sit there getting insulted. You may not sit down, maybe for whatever reason he couldn't reserve a seat for you, but go say Mazel Tov, right? Don't do that. But the Maharal gives a deeper answer. He says, the love of Kamsa and his friend was an exclusive love, meaning he was Kamsa's friend and this man's enemy. They formed a clique of people who are in and people who are out. That type of ahava is not called ahava, he says. That's not the positive ahava. That's an ahava which is divisive, which is exclusive, which is rejecting. So that's not the ahava which is there. So therefore, right, to develop and to build up the idea of Ahavas Yisrael, a person has to know to relate to a person, not just, and it doesn't mean that you become blind to a person's uniqueness, you treat them as a unique person, but to relate to the fact of developing that because this person's a Jew, that there's a sense of love. And it's something that people should meet and feel when they meet you and they let you know that you're Jewish, that there's a special love that comes out there just because of that, even if you've hardly known the person. It parallels somewhat something interesting I heard from Rabbi Yonasan David Shliter, Hutner's son-in-law, in Bad L'Chaim, that he was speaking about Pirkei Avos, where it says, Kol ha'oski mimat tzibur, yoski mimoim l'shem shamayim. Whoever works, helps, and askin, what you call, who helps the tzibur, should do so l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, sheschus avosam esayatam v'tzikosom b'medeslad. Because the tzibur has this tremendous power of the merit of their forefathers, and the tzidkus of the tzibur, of the general tzibur of Am Yisrael, is always there. Individuals may go up, may go down, but the tzibur always has that. So it was in a shir, he asked us, he said, how many people does a person have to work with to be considered osek imat tzibur? You need 1 million? Does it have to be 10? Does it have to be 3? He says, it could be even 1. When you're taking care of this person, because this person is part of the tzibur of Am Yisrael. Sometimes the person, he said, will be taking care of 1,000 people. But that's because it's his friends, it's his associates, it's other people. That's not osek imat tzibur, right? That's something that's done throughout the world, right? You help me, I help you. I have certain talents. I like to help people. That's not osek imat tzibur. Osek imat tzibur can be that one person, but he's part of the tzibur of Am Yisrael. And there you merit all of those things. Now, based on what the Rambam says, in terms of Avas HaGer being because of the Maila, and also hurting the Ger because of his tremendous Maila. So it's interesting here in the Dirshu Chavetz Chaim, they're dealing with the question about, can you tell other people that someone is a Ger? Right? Is it something, someone joined the shul, right? Hops in, right? Davens, goes to the shurim, and you happen to find out your wife was talking to this one who heard, oh, he's a ger. So it's a curious bit of information. You go telling people in the shul, right? You know he's a ger. So again, not getting into the psak, it's a little bit complicated. It really, bottom line goes in terms of what the person wants. If for whatever reason he's uncomfortable about it, he doesn't want it, that's his thing. But theoretically, it's a tremendous milah. They bring here of Matisyahu Solomon. He says it's a fascinating quote. He wrote it in Nakdoma to a certain sefer. He says that there is no higher, more noble title in Am Yisrael than the title of Ger Tzedek. Okay, that is, he said, the way it is to be viewed. He gets a special mitzvah of Ava because of his Maila. Now, they also bring the question of talking about a person saying, you know, this person's a Baal Tshuva. First of all, parenthetically, I'll say, Marash Yeshiva, Rabban Shechter Zatzal, did not like the term Baal Tshuva. He said, because it implies that this person was a great sinner and he repented and became a Baal Tshuva. That's not really applicable. Usually the people who get the term Baal Tshuva are people who didn't know much about Torah and mitzvahs, and they came and they learned. And as they learned, then they started to take on Torah mitzvah. He said a much more appropriate term would be late starters. That would be much more appropriate. A Baal Tshuva is a Jew who grew up in the Orthodox community, talking lots of Lashon Hara, And then someday, right, the Rav gives a shir in shul from Chavetz Chaim, and he says, I better do something about that. And he starts learning Chavetz Chaim and being more careful. That person's a Baal Tshuva. Okay, he says that's the real terms of how and where it should be going. But in terms of the generic thing which is there, so again, Matisyahu Solomon Zatzal said an interesting thing. He said he thinks that the same superlatives, right, even if it's not the exact halacha applying to it, but the same superlatives that the Torah gives to the Ger Tzedek, like the Rambam says, who left so many things, in Kein Tachas Kanfei Ashchina, applies to what's called Balei Tshuva in our generation, both in terms of the Maila and in terms of the difficulties, right? A person has been living a lifestyle, let's say, devoid of Torah, with some Jewish tradition. It's one he's comfortable with, it's the one his family lives, and here the person comes and leaves that, bringing huge amounts of difficulty and opposition with his family and with his relatives and with different things. And no, I can't eat that. No, I can't come here. No, I can't do that on Shabbos, and all of those things. And he also enters a world in which he's a newcomer and unfamiliar and unconnected in many ways. And he has to go through a large amount of pain and discomfort oftentimes in that transition. So he says he feels that such people should also be viewed with that same honor as the person, as the Ger Tzedek as well. Okay, now, Levaisa, just finishing, I'll mention that we should all be, right, we should all be Balei Tshuva, we should all be Ger Tzedek, really, also. Right? They tell a story that somebody came to, it was one of the Ger Rebbe's, I think the Beis Yisrael, and he was speaking with somebody, he said, he learns in a kollel from Balei Tshuva, but he's not a Baal Tshuva. So the Rebbe said, why not? In other words, it's something we should all be doing. And in terms of Gerus, so again, we remember Kigerim Yisem, when we're approaching now Matan Torah, they learn halachas of Gerus from what Am Yisrael did at Matan Torah. We should be going through Gerus again, even though, so to speak, we're in, but it should be as if. The famous Rebbe, the Yehudei HaKadosh mi Parshas, the Holy Jew of Parshas, why did he get that nickname, the Holy Jew? So the Hasidim said, because his avodah was so intense, it was as if he was misgayer every day from fresh. It was as if he became a Jew every day, right? And it's something, there are cases, I'll finish, there was once I was in a mikveh, it was there before Yom Kippur when I was living in Chicago, and some Rabbonim from the local Beis Din came in, a young man who was 13, and he had been adopted. He was born not Jewish. He was adopted by a religious family, brought up in Torah and mitzvahs and going to day school. But at the time of bar mitzvah, he has to re-accept Torah and mitzvahs. So they asked everybody to clear out from the mikveh area, but I was able to hear what was going on. And there are questions that you ask. You go through with him again. Do you accept the Torah shebichsav, the Torah shebal peh? All these different things. Do you commit yourself to this, to that? And I was like shaking when I heard it. And then I heard the splash. It was very powerful, right? That young man of 13 did that and went through that. But Lamaisa, every morning when we get up and we're Makabel Ol Malchus Shamayim and we say Birchas HaTorah, we should be doing the same thing. So hopefully this will help spread Ahava and Am Yisrael, both V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, both V'ahavta mesager, and we should be able to learn from those people and their great milas and implement them in our lives.